how many of the Muslims are Islamists? For instance, throughout the Arab Muslim world and throughout Europe, what we find is a huge number. Like, for instance, if you go to Egypt, the polling that they show is 90% of the people in Egypt believe in a strict adherence to Sharia law. That means they're in for the stoning, the lashings, the beheadings, the dismemberments.
They're justifying and rationalizing terrorism.
They love it and they believe it.
I believe that the death cult of the jihadism represents a minority. I want to believe this.
That's not what the polling shows, Israel. Not in Middle Eastern, North African, and Persian Gulf countries. No, that's not what it shows. The majority of people believed in a strict adherence to Sharia law. This is the same people who barbarians gang raped Israeli teenagers. Some of them, wait for it, I see that you're sitting, they raped the corpses of Israeli girls. This is what we're dealing with. On October 8th, every nation in this world should have said, Israel, we got this. Don't lift a finger. Jew-hating people, that this pathology, it's the world's oldest prejudice. And it's so deep, so pernicious, that they, as we discussed, they overlook, it supersedes all other values. The progressive is looking at the Islamist and says, wait a minute, you are openly calling for the death of Jews? I love that. We love that. We believe too that white privileged Jews deserve to be dead. That's perfect. Let's join up.
Do you believe Israel's military response to October 7th is an expression of justice or revenge? And should we care about the differentiation between the two?
In my book, Payback, the Case of Revenge, I say there's no difference between them. There's no justice unless victims feel avenged. And there's no revenge. Revenge is not revenge if you are not respectful of the amount of revenge you can take. Disproportionality does not mean that you are committing war crimes because you have killed more other people of the enemy nation civilians than your civilians. They are collateral damage. The damage is collateral to the aim. What's the aim? Winning a war, right? Genocide is you're not in a war. Your whole purpose is to eliminate the size, the people themselves. Now, the Palestinian people have tripled in population since the, quote, occupation. You know what that means, Israel? That the nation of Israel is the worst genocidal nation on earth. The least successful. They suck at it. If genocide is their goal, you can't triple your population and scream genocide.
I am Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View, a companion to the Wake Up Call. Please don't be shy. Share this episode. Follow me on IsraelEllis.com and on Substack.
Girls with pink or purple hair, who could be lesbians, or they're telling you they're lesbians with purple hair, representing the progressive mantle, standing beside women wearing a hijab, and they're both screaming for the same thing. The woman wearing the hijab is standing next to the girl with purple hair. They don't agree on any. They would hate each other in any other. Right, they hate each other in every other capacity.
Two guys holding hands in Ramallah.
Yeah.
Kissing each other in public. What do you think their life expectancy is?
They're instantly dead.
Instantly thrown from a building, whatever. I mean, there is no, and there absolutely, there's no secret about it, right?
Yeah.
This is what's going to happen to you. And yet, you see these stupid people.
Yeah.
Stupid people.
Well, Jew-hating people. This pathology, it's the world's oldest prejudice. And it's so deep, so pernicious, that they, as we discussed, they overlook, it supersedes all other values. And we have, the progressive is looking at the Islamist and says, wait a minute, you are openly calling for the death of Jews? I love that. We love that. We believe too that white privileged Jews deserve to be dead. And there should be no Jewish country, homeland. That's perfect. Let's join up. Let's, again, I think individually, they're small and fringe. Together, they are a critical mass. And they become a critical mass throughout Western Europe. Now, in Western Europe, the Islamist numbers were so large because of the Syrian refugee crisis that they really didn't need the progressive Marxists in Europe. They had plenty of Muslims. I don't know if this is true in Canada.
Well, Canada, I think I've heard the number, and I believe that the Muslim population in Canada is at 5.8%. And that's a critical point, because I believe that the nexus of political disproportionation in terms of in terms of pandering to the vote is around 5.6%. So some would say that we've passed that nexus. We've just passed the nexus. What do you think it is in America?
I don't know. I know this. I know that Dearborn, Michigan is now a Muslim majority city with a Muslim mayor. Nothing like this was ever imaginable. A large city in a large battleground state, Dearborn, Michigan, has more than 50% of the people are Muslim. The second question is, how many of the Muslims are Islamists? For instance, throughout the Arab Muslim world and throughout Europe, what we find is, a huge number, like for instance, if you go to Egypt, the polling that they show is 90% of the people in Egypt believe in a strict adherence to Sharia law. That means they're in for the stoning, the lashings, the beheadings, the dismemberments, the killing.
They're justifying and rationalizing terrorism.
Yeah, they love it and they believe it. So the question was, well, yes, there are a lot of Muslims in Canada, but are they Islamists? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know this. I don't know of any imam in Canada or the United States that openly rejected what took place on October 7th. I haven't heard that person. Maybe there is.
I think so. Well, it's kind of interesting thing, because I had this conversation with Robert Spencer. And of course, he is the director of Jihad Watch. And it was an amazing interview that we did together. And I asked him the question. I asked him the very controversial question: are all Muslim terrorists? And it's an offensive question, in my opinion. If I was a Muslim watching this right now, I'd say, are all Jews stingy, or are all Jews? It's stereotyping, but I don't think it's so much of a stereotype as it is more of an ideological sort of shift in sort of, what we've got. But here's sort of what I said to Robert. I said, there's 2 billion, there's nearly 2 billion Muslims in the world, and Jews are a fraction of Muslims. And I can't believe that all Muslims are part of a death cult. And I know for a fact there are imams out there, and there are many different Muslim communities. In fact, if you look at Albania, and Albania, for example, is a majority Muslim country that has done tremendous things to protect the Jews. And there have been centuries, there have been hundreds of years of cooperative and friendly living side by side between Muslim and Jewish communities. So I think that the idea, that the concept of jihadism, this death cult, I want to believe that while we might have these numbers of Muslims out there, that they still represent a fraction. Now, the question is...
Wait, what represents a fraction?
I believe that the death cult of the jihadism represents a minority. I want to believe this.
That's not what the polling shows, Israel. Not in Middle Eastern, North African, and Persian Gulf countries. No, that's not what it shows. The majority of people believed in a strict adherence to Sharia law. Now, what in Europe, since so many of them fled Syria and those war-torn countries, the percentage is very high there too. Like, for instance, forget, this has nothing to do with Jews. If you're German, you remember what took place a number of years ago on New Year's Eve, where Muslims remember Germany took in more Muslims than any other European state. And they called it an infidel's holiday. And thousands of Muslim men raped and sexually assaulted German women on New Year's Eve. I think it was 2019. You could look it up. The press didn't cover it, and the government were afraid to talk about it. And they didn't release the story until late April. And the German people were outraged because they knew that they had a real problem. They called it an infidel's holiday. Muslim, and this has nothing to do with Jews, Muslim men, these were Islamists. They believed this is the same people who barbarians gang raped Israeli teenagers. Some of them, wait for it, I see that you're sitting, they raped the corpses of Israeli girls. This is what we're dealing with. Moral relativism. Well, who are we to say that you shouldn't rape a corpse? I mean, if they like it, they like it. Instead of saying, no, in a civilized world, on October 8th, every nation in this world should have said, Israel, we got this. Don't lift a finger. We will eliminate Hamas. Let's remember, 6,000 people invaded Israel on October 7th, but only 4,000 were Hamas and Islamic Jihad. That means a third of the people were civilians. Now, I don't see why any of them deserve to live. I'm not sure I understand. You don't need to be
in your book Payback, The Case for Revenge, you defend the idea that vengeance has a moral place in society.
It's also a justice space in society.
Do you believe Israel's military response to October 7th is an expression of justice or revenge? And should we care about the differentiation between the two?
In my book, Payback, The Case for Revenge, I say there's no difference between them. There's no justice unless victims feel avenged. And there's no revenge. Revenge is not revenge if you are not respectful of the amount of revenge you can take under international law, under international humanitarian law, under the laws of armed conflict. In my more recent book, Beyond Proportionality, Israel's Just War in Gaza, I make a strong case under international law, military doctrine, and morality that every move, every action that Israel's taken it completely comports with international law, military doctrine, and moral justice. But yes, I think that my problem is that people aren't being more honest about the number of civilians that should be killed for the crimes they've committed. You don't get an exemption because you're not carrying a weapon. You don't get an exemption because you're not a card-carrying member. If you gang raped an Israeli girl, if you beheaded somebody, if you've been holding hostages in your house, you should be dead. It's that simple, and it's not.
Thane, I wanted to stop you for a second. I want to congratulate you, by the way, on the recent publication of your book, Beyond Proportionality, available on Amazon and where you like to buy books, also published by Wicked Sun Press, Post Hill Press. So congratulations. It takes a lot to write a book. You've written, this is your 10th book, which is quite a feat. Tell us, what was the obvious impetus, a motivation behind Beyond Proportionality? What is your dissertation? What is your main thesis of the book? And what are you hoping the message of the book, the evidence that you're leaving behind with this book, what is that?
So Israel, I have been troubled. I started this with an op-ed I wrote in the Wall Street Journal in the 2014 war in Gaza, because we have a fundamental misunderstanding of international humanitarian law. And we have imbeciles like Bernie Sanders and others who use the word disproportionality wrong. They don't know what they're saying. They just like the word. Disproportionality does not mean that you are committing war crimes because you have killed more other people of the enemy nation civilians than your civilians. Proportionality does not require a 1-to-1 ratio. If you kill a civilian, we get to kill a civilian. A nation could be fighting consistent with the laws of armed conflict and not have a single civilian of theirs killed. And they can kill an enormous number of civilians on the other side, and that would not make it disproportionate. So the idea that proportionality was being misused, that Israel must be fighting illegally, they must be fighting an unjust war unjustly, because so many civilians are being killed. And the answer is proportionality has nothing to do with how many civilians are being killed. Nothing to do. The standard under the law is, what are you firing at? What's your target? If your target has a military necessity and it is substantial, Are you firing at weapons depots and warehousing? Are you firing at communication or command centers? Are you firing at high value targets or terrorists? It doesn't matter whether they are surrounding themselves with their family members or other civilians. If they are the target and they're who you're firing at, the civilian death toll is called casualties of war. They are collateral damage. What is collateral damage? It means it's collateral. The damage is collateral to the aim. What's the aim? Winning a war, right? Genocide is you're not in a war. Your whole purpose is to eliminate the people themselves, either in whole or in part. If that's your objective, like the final solution to the Jewish question, that was the goal of the Nazis, the killing of Cambodians by the Khmer Rouge, the killing of Tutsis in Rwanda. Those are classic, the killing of Armenians by Turkey. Those are in specific intents to eliminate a people in whole or in part. Now, the Palestinian people have tripled in population since the quote occupation. You know what that means, Israel? That the nation of Israel is the worst genocidal nation on earth, the least successful. They suck at it. If genocide is their goal, you can't triple your population and scream genocide. You need a subtraction. If you don't have a subtraction, you can't scream genocide unless you're Palestinian.
This is the bizarre definition by UNRWA of what is a Palestinian refugee. So Thane, what is the biggest takeaway in Beyond Proportionality? What can we look forward to when we read that book in terms of what is the aha moment that you're hoping people are going to get from this book?
Well, the numbers that are being thrown about of number of Palestinian killed. Now they say it's 56,000. First of all, Israel believes that more than half of everyone they've killed are members of Hamas or Islamic Jihad. An additional 30% represent the family members of these terrorists. If these terrorists will not send their children away during the time that they're fighting these wars, the responsibility of the killing of civilians is the responsibility of the people who put them in harm's way. That's not Israel. Israel doesn't put them in harm's way. The terrorists put them in harm. Under the law of war manual, under the laws of the protocols of the Geneva Conventions, the additional protocols that were established in 1977, you are responsible for the civilians that you have put in harm's way. Israel has given evacuation notices. They telegraph to the enemy, here's what we're doing tomorrow. What army on earth calls the enemy and says, we're going to give you our playbook. Here's where we're going to be tomorrow. They send text messages, voicemails.
They do the knocking on the door.
They do something even more ridiculous. They drop from helicopters speakers, loudspeakers in Arabic that says, this address will be destroyed tomorrow at noon, or whatever the number is. If you're not leaving, it's not Israel's spot.
I think that in addition to the words relativism and the words equivalence, I think that another important term would therefore be moral responsibility.
Yes, quite right.
And the idea of moral responsibility, that does not come up very much in any of the discussions. I don't hear that term very much. But the fact is that there is a moral responsibility for what happened on October 7th. And that moral responsibility extends well beyond the people of Gaza. It extends to funding of terrorism,
right,
by organizations that are there, specifically UNRWA. UNRWA is big business.
Well, we learned in this war, and it's in my book, Beyond Proportionality, we learned how UNRWA officials, people getting salaries from the United Nations, actually were fighting on October 7th against Israel.
The average UNRWA executive salary is $236,000 US.
And they're terrorists. They're being paid, and they're participating in terrorism. They're teaching terrorism. They're inciting hate among the Gazans. They use their offices. They create command centers in hospitals. These are people receiving salaries. The one other thing I want to point out, Israel, when you ask about the book, it's not just the numbers and the complicity, because I feel very strongly about the civilian complicity. There are civilians in Gaza. They're just not innocent civilians. So,
and that is a big difference. That is a big difference. When people look difference. At the idea,
the Geneva Convention, when they were drafted post World War II, Israel, they never met a Gazan. If they met a Gazan, they would have wrote it differently. They didn't know. They didn't know there were people
in Gaza. It is documented, as you well know, as we both know, and as we've seen. The citizens of Gaza, they float across that border. They assisted terrorists
aid and abet
from breaking down doors of safe rooms, of killing of innocent civilians, men, women, children.
The IDF, Israel, did not find many apartments or homes of civilians in which guns were not being stored under the beds of the children. Not guns for the family, guns for Hamas. Why? So that Hamas could run into your apartment if they're on foot, on chase, and know that they have weapons that they could pull out of your apartment. Everyone was there arming Hamas. So no, the Geneva Conventions were not written with that in mind. That's why the protocols that were added in 1977 clarified that if you are put in harm's way by terrorists, the responsibility is on the terrorists. If you are participating in any way, then you have joined the fight. If you've joined the fight, stop using the word civilian. You may be a civilian, you're just not an innocent civilian.
You're a target. You're a justified
one other thing I
target.
want to make sure that your audience listeners hear is what think tanks and even the United Nations and even Hamas itself is starting to admit. Their numbers are, they're not only false, but they're fraudulent. So for instance, there were 11,000 names that could not be identified by birth dates, and so they were simply, or ID numbers, they were simply tossed into the pool of women and children. They were just called women and children. There are 5,000 people who were sick and died of natural causes that were attributed to Israel. There is a woman who's still alive today who's receiving cancer treatments that's listed as dead under the Gaza Health Ministry. They counted a woman who has cancer who's still alive as dead. So when you start screaming about genocide, we're not even sure these numbers are real. My guess is that the vast, vast, vast majority of people were either members of Hamas or Islamic Jihad or participated in such a manner that they are no longer considered innocent civilians and they were legitimate targets. And if that's the case, you have to say to yourself, what is it about Gaza, the ruination of Gaza, that didn't upset you when it came to Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Dresden? Because those cities were decimated also. And those cities had no military significance, very little. They were destroyed for vengeance sake and to end the war quicker. And guess what? Atlanta was burned by Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln would have been a Zionist, there's no question. And Abraham Lincoln would have supported Israel's war in Gaza because he said to his generals, we are going to end this war and end slavery. And the way to do this is we're going to punish the Confederacy, not just the army, but the people. They burned down Atlanta. Tecumseh Sherman's march that started in Atlanta and ended in Washington, D.C., Sherman's march was designed to send a message to all the Southerners, put an end to this war. We are holding you responsible for this war, and you better tell the Confederacy to lay down their weapons. Now, if you were okay with the winning of the Civil War, then you have to be okay with the war that Israel's fighting in Gaza.
It's a phenomenal argument. I mean, when you talk about Hiroshima, you talk about Dresden, you talk about Atlanta. The question is, I mean,
that's how wars get won. That's how you win a war.
And so you, as a philosopher, as an ideologue, as someone who is a domain expert in law, with respect, you would publicly identify Gaza as justified destruction in the sense of what they and the moral responsibility is that they brought this on themselves.
Well, Israel, there's another point that people don't want to. Everyone wants to scream ceasefire, but no hostages were returned. And more importantly, after October 7th, and it's in my book, I have a quote, the numbers of times throughout the Islamic world, but specifically among the Gazan leaders of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the promise and the commitment that we will repeat October 7th again and again. They use the words again and again, again and again. This words, that use was used by a number of public officials, elected leaders. Remember, Hamas was elected. They were elected by the Gazans. The Gazans had a choice and they chose terrorism. That was their decision. So when Israel hears the words after what happened on October 7th again and again, Israel has no obligation to do anything other than
they're not being very subtle about it.
No, they're allowed to. Israel has every moral and legal right to keep killing until they can establish deterrence, until the enemy is vanquished.
And it's not just Gaza. It's not just Gaza, because Israel is confronted on all fronts. And what recently happened in Iran, but it continues to happen. And I find it completely bizarre that there's a ceasefire with Iran right now, but that the Houthis are continuing to send missiles over to Israel. And the Houthis is a direct proxy of Iran. So effectively, Iran is breaking that ceasefire. And I believe that, brilliant military actions on behalf of Israel and precision targeting to a fault. But I think that this ceasefire is bullshit. And I believe that the frustration that I have, and I think it's shared by many, is that the job needs to be finished. They need to take out the Ayatollah. And they're not. And for some reason, I don't know if it's a strategy by Trump, who you cannot predict either way, wherever the wind blows. But the fact is that the man is out there and he's doing things that have never been before done. And he's courageous in his actions. And yet I'm not sure if he is bizarrely dissonant or disillusioned, believes in the fact that the ceasefire is in fact a legitimate ceasefire, or if he's just doing things because he wants to cloud any kind of moral responsibility. And he's concerned, of course, with pandering to the vote, but he's actually brilliant in the sense of using the red herring to provide historically the justification for any kind of destruction. And I think that the Iranians themselves should be taking this moment of weakness, and they themselves, and I think this is the key thing behind the Trump strategy, is that it hasn't worked for us in the past to do a regime change, not in Iraq and not in Libya, and certainly not in Afghanistan. It was a complete failure. So I think that the hope here is that the Iranian people are going to take this opportunity and unseat the Iranian Islamic theocratic regime without the military intervention having done it for them. And I think that's a very clear and very important point. So really, Israel is embattled by all sides, and all of this does come down to the Iranian proxy. I am Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View. I've done this podcast as a companion to the wake-up call. I'm going to ask you, don't be shy. Get it out there. Share it. Comment on this episode. Follow me on israelellis.com and on Substack. And I thank you for tuning in today when it's a lot easier to tune out.